And when I was up in Anchorage, Alaska, this woman came to me for a consultation, very well-dressed woman, very educated, had a PhD, all of this. And after we had finished our session and we were just chatting, what she did is that she said to me, she said, I'd like to share something with you, and I'd like your feedback on it. She said, I feel like I've been cheated. And I was surprised. And that's when I learned she came from a particular village in Alaska. The name of the village, I don't remember. She said, when Alaska became a state, her mother turned to her, flatly refusing to train her in the disciplines that the women of this village had been trained in for generations, thousands of years. She refused to train her. She said, you must live in the world that you're going to be living in. So you must do things the white man's way. You must get your education. You must learn to do this, that, or the other. She flatly refused to teach her anything about her background of native tradition and culture. She said, in my village, women were trained from the time that they were little girls to do the equivalent of remote viewing. The reason they did that is because when the men would go out for a hunt, if they were out in the ocean or if they were on land, many times they traveled long, long, long distances. And if anybody became injured, the women were tracking them. And if something happened, they'd go to the local shaman in their village or wherever the shaman was, and they would send out a rescue party. Now, think about that. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have GPS. They didn't have anything like that. So this was a skill that these people developed. The women were trained because they were left behind. They had to take care of the children and, take care of food stores and all of this. Also, she shared a story about a shaman. And she said the shaman that was known in our village was highly respected. And there were two brothers that had gone out on a fishing expedition and they had drowned. And in her culture, she said, we believe that if the bodies are not brought back, that the soul will wander. So this is part of their culture. And she said this mother was absolutely anxious because her boys had died at sea and they weren't going to be found. The bodies were never found. They really didn't know where it was. So she goes to the shaman, the mother does, and she says, please find my sons and bring them home because their souls will wander. So the shaman says, let me see what I can do. And he goes and he spends some time. After, I don't know how much time, he comes out, he calls to a couple of men in the village and then tells them to go out to a certain area in the ocean. And he gives them a specific location. He said, you are to stay there in your boat until the bodies rise to the surface. The men did as they were instructed to do. They went out to the area of ocean as they were told to do. And sure enough, they sat out there, they waited. Both bodies of the two young men that had drowned came to the surface. They were able to bring them back to land so that they could have the ceremony. And according to the villagers' belief, the soul would not wander anymore. And I just, this is something. Now, she said, I really regret that this training was not given to me. She said, I have a fabulous education otherwise, but this is something that could be used in everyday life. And little by little, we are coming to the understanding of this. So when you have stories like this, when you have people that have had near-death experiences, when you have people that have witnessed the soul executing from, or, going out of the body, and you watch this, the stories I've heard, it's literally hundreds of stories. And it's wonderful when you realize that there's this phenomenal aspect that we have. And I look at it and I go, wow, there's so many different stories of so many different experiences. It is to make you aware that the consciousness that exists, that we are a part of, is Just amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and I wonder, I'll let you come in here, Dan, because I know you have questions. I'm jumping in. Once I get on a train of thought here, I'm hesitant to let go of the microphone here because Donna's taking us to really interesting areas. And one of the things, because you brought it back to near-death experiences, I know there's a new book. I think it was translated to English. You may know which one I'm talking about. I can't remember which researchers, but its focus was on the so-called veridical NDEs. In other words, veridical meaning truth, but also, I was looking up the definition here, but basically truth. They're calling it veridical experiences because they're shared experiences between multiple witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
And what appears to happen in these cases, and they've documented many of them, it's not just one or two that can be dismissed as some weird coincidence, but it's dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds, where people present at the moment of death of a loved one. And I think this includes not just family members, but as you were saying, nurses, doctors. I mean, they're involved in these situations. They may or may not talk about it. I tend to agree that it's probably the nurses who are closer than the doctors who jump in, do their surgery, and they get on to their next appointment. The nurses have more of a personal relationship potentially with patients. So multiple witnesses to extraordinary events, opening of doors, visions, shared visions. And I wonder, because you mentioned there's kind of a timeline, it looks like, for us waking up to this. You can, the excuse for the US in particular and the Western world is that we are a relatively young country, right? We've only been around for 200 to 300 years, not thousands of years. Maybe that plays into why we're so hesitant to believe these legends and stories and accounts from other areas of the world. But I'm wondering if there's a process in place that we can't stop despite the skepticism. Is it just a natural evolution that we will eventually have to accept that this bigger reality, this universal consciousness exists? And I'm thinking this example of the shared NDEs, that's not something that you will consciously. It's just something that happens that is something you can't interpret any other way than that people are experiencing a fantastic thing simultaneously. And you don't walk away from an experience like that and say, well, that was just coincidence. You say that was profound and it changes your life. So I'm wondering, Donna, the question is, do you think there's a natural evolution towards this that cannot be stopped necessarily? Not that we want to stop it, but it's just how things are going, regardless of our desire, or our amount of skepticism.
Yes, I do think it is an evolution. I do think that there have always been those that were centuries ahead, just like Tesla. I use him as an example because of his concepts about free energy, so many things. It takes a maturation. And that is why many times those that would have the experiences would not talk about it. Padre Pio out of Italy. This was a healer that I've done some interviews with people relative to him. And even today, he is working with people, and he died many years ago. But this woman that I interviewed had a chance to meet him in person, and he helped to heal her husband. But there are those people that have these phenomenal talents and abilities, and usually they don't want to be too public about it because she was, let's face it, a lot of them were crucified or burned at the stake or chopped up, and fed to the dogs. And that's rather crude and coarse, but that was the mentality of
Right.
people. And so with COVID, and something I have been saying for the last 2 years, going on 3 now, with that environment, there was a pushing forward of like 10 years because of the lockdowns, because of all the different things people were experiencing, because we had taken so much for granted. People became more aware of death, which is very much a part of life. We're all going to kick the bucket at one time or another. Some of us are here for a short term, sometimes maybe seconds. Other people are here to live to be 130. There's some guy in the Middle East that died at 130 years of age just about 2 weeks ago. All right. And, 104, 105. We're living longer because we have better conditions around than our ancestors did. Technology has enabled us and also crippled us in some respects, but it's pushing. We are in a cycle of an advancement that's occurring not just with a few, but with millions, billions of people. They have been forced to awaken to certain levels of awareness. Might have taken them another 10 years or so to become aware of that. So we are evolving. And I look, for example, at what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia. And that's the primary attention of so many people right now, justifiably so. And it's because of an individual who has wanted to go backwards, doing behaviors that generations ago, not that far back, really, would have been acceptable. It's something that we didn't have the communication capacity when Hitler was doing his work. We didn't have the communication capacity when Stalin and Pol Pot, Idi Amin. I mean, look at what happened in the 20th century. My Lord, we had enough despots working and killing and brutalizing people and just horrible things that went on in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. It was said that we had 20 wars going at any one time on this planet. So here we've got something with Ukraine and Russia, and there's other places on this planet that are going through a lot of trauma in their own way. If it's not from the environment, it's from a despotic person that's in a position of leadership. So here we've got this, and you'll hear a commentary, like one woman's commentary that I heard. She said, "This is the 21st century. We don't have time for this kind of stuff. This doesn't fit." Now, you would not have heard that in the 1900s, in the 1800s. It just wouldn't have been said. This is, look at what's happening on the response or with the response of nations around the world. They're going saying, "Excuse me, we don't need this disruption. We got to take care of business, for heaven's sakes. You cannot do this." This person is going according to a modality that worked in Stalin's era, for example. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to go back to the era of Stalin. He's KGB. Those are facts. That's not something that's being made up. So when you have that kind of a mentality, and you have another mentality that's coming in and saying, this is not acceptable, you've got a major shift going on. And it's not just with the US, it's all over the world that's coming in. The amount of people that say, "Oh, it's perfectly fine what he's doing." Believe me, it's a very tiny one. It's a very tiny one. So we are in a push. It's as if there is a maturation that has been put into place that said, isolate, but realize the value of the human connection. Realize the value of communicating with each other. Realize the value of being able to adapt to change. Realize that you make a difference right where you are. Realize it's your job to grow up. To grow up. And there's still some people that are going to have tantrums and say, "I don't want to do it," just like a 2-year-old. So they can regress if they want, but there are those of us that realize that this is happening. And I think it's phenomenal. I really do. I think it's phenomenal. And I don't think we're going backwards. I think we're going forwards, and we're going forward at such a speed that it's frightening to a lot of people because it's not what was before. You cannot ignore it. It literally has been put upon us. Do I make sense?
Oh yeah, and I agree, and I do hope that you're right and that we don't. I mean, of course, we'll have bumps in the road and we'll regress. Hopefully, it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back situation rather than the reverse. But I think that's why there's so much interest in the topics that you discuss in your show, that we discuss here. Is there's just a growing interest in learning something more, something more meaningful than what we've been doing for so long, because that gets tedious and it just doesn't feel like moving. It doesn't feel like evolving. And so I think that's what we're helping to do here, hopefully. I've got one more thing that I want to make sure to cover before we run out of time, but I can wait till the end, because it's kind of newer research that's come out that I find very exciting. And I'm sure that Donna knows about it, has probably run across it. I want to talk about that, but I want to give Dan a chance to talk here too, because I know you got some stuff, Dan, right?
Well, I'm always amazed at Dave's way of portraying what's going on during our conversations. He kind of talks like he's monopolizing the conversation. But I've known Dave for 25 years.
Yeah.
So we've been doing this podcast for like 12. Dave always advances the conversation in an interesting way. And his question about the Akashic records, I was thinking about that when he asked the question. So, Dave, I appreciate your apologetic.
We're on the same wavelength, though, but I do want you to get in there and ask some questions, because I know you've got your own approach to all this too.
Right. And I appreciate that. So, Donna, I'm thinking about, and I've never had a near-death experience. I've read about other people's near-death experiences, and there seems to be, I want to call it a stereotype of those experiences. And you said something that would indicate to me that it's, like many stereotypes, not accurate. What I'm talking about is the tunnel where the people are going down the white light. They see all their relatives, their past pets. Maybe they meet with Jesus. Maybe they meet with somebody else. That doesn't happen probably in the number of NDEs or people you've interviewed that have had NDEs. It doesn't always happen, right?
True. I have found there's been a diversity of experiences. One of I'd say the common threads that I have seen, and it's not with everyone, but it's not atypical. And that is, they will say they have a conversation with someone. They will describe it as a light or a being. Sometimes, dependent on their cultural background, there will be a god of some kind or a religious symbol. Whatever is going to be significant to that individual that's going through the experience. It's very personal for them, very personal. And there is conversation, there is information that is given. People will be told, you're not going to stay. You've got to go back. Sometimes it's a relative that's telling them that. Sometimes it's another person that they've never met. Sometimes it might be a group of people. But there is this communication that goes on. And sometimes people in this communication are given information about what they need to take care of. Some people will be shown how, I know of one person that went through a near-death experience. They were really a first-class jerk. And when they were going through their near-death experience, I mean, I'm telling you that that's how they described themselves. They were very selfish. They were very self-centered, which is being selfish, of course. But they really were harming a lot of people. And in this near-death experience, they actually were put in the position of being the persons that they had harmed, so that they were feeling what that person went through. And it transformed their thinking. When they came back, they said, I can't do anything like this. I had no idea because they were so self-centered. So people will have these different experiences. And I just find it extremely fascinating, uh, all of the variables that go with it. And as a friend of mine said, she said, everyone she's ever known, including herself, comes back with a gift. And I'll circle back to the woman that I mentioned that had the near-death experience and didn't see the white light and didn't see the tunnel and didn't have any of that. But she came back with an awareness. And my friend had told her, this was your gift. You've come back with an understanding. So it's as if these people go through these experiences because they have an option to work with. They're given a choice. Do they have to obey it? No. But most people are so impressed with these experiences, it transforms their thinking and the way they work with others too.
You'll probably recognize this name, and I think this guy is responsible for me doing this program and probably for a lot of my thinking. You'll probably recognize the name Art Bell
Oh,
and
yes.
Coast to Coast AM. So I remember listening to Coast one time, and this is kind of the opposite of the question I just asked about the white light. Have you ever talked to anyone who had a hellish experience as far as the near-death experience? Because I think on Art Bell's show, I once heard some guy who essentially described going to hell as
Mhm.
part of his NDE. So could you
Yes.
address that?
Yes, that can happen with people. And when that does happen, can you imagine this is probably something that's already been felt by this person? And so they're being shown basically, this is what you think you're going to go into. And if you keep up your behavior,
You
it's
will.
there for you. All right.
Yeah.
And that has happened with a lot of people. That can even happen in a dream experience, which technically you are when you're in the dream level, depending on its level, you're out of your body anyway. Everybody goes out of their body, at night. That's why people sometimes, and my mentor used to say to me when I would complain about, gee whiz, I'm in such a boring job, and I was just beginning to develop my skills. And she said, Donna, you work so hard at night when you're asleep, you're not aware of it. And she said, you need a boring job so you can stay awake during the day. And it was something that I just thought, really? But I was having so many experiences, being able to see. This is something I have not had happen but once, but where I was able to see through my eyes without my eyes being open. I could see very, very clearly. I was out of my body. And what I found out later, and I was questioning people that I had come in contact with, they couldn't explain it to me. I said, well, what is it? Well, what it was is I was out of my body and I could feel myself turning around in my body. It was a very unique experience, but I came across some material because I'm an avid reader, and I was an avid reader long before I got into doing my shows. And sure enough, it was a Tibetan Lama that I found information on and read his material, and he explained it. And I said, that's it. That's exactly what I was going through. So many times we don't have the language, the words to help describe things. And these experiences are so personal. They're so personal.
Yes. Well, Dave, let's go back to your, because we are coming up on an hour and 15 minutes. We want to be cognizant of the fact that Donna probably has something else to do besides talk to us. Why don't you ask your question that you wanted to end up things with?
Okay, well, I ran across this article a couple days ago. It was actually at Russia Times, which doesn't, it's the website is down because, as Donna was explaining, people have kind of come together and said, Russia, you're being a big bully. You have to sit in the corner now for a while. So we're taking down your websites. We're taking down your stock market, sanctions. Anyway, so it doesn't exist at rt.com, but I did find it on livescience.com. And the title is First Ever Scan of a Dying Human Brain Reveals Life May Actually Flash Before Your Eyes. Of course, I saw that headline. I've got, aggregated news sites of all these kind of interesting headlines. I don't want to miss any, but this one jumped out. It was an accidental finding made when a man with epilepsy was undergoing a routine brain scan. Unfortunately, he had a heart attack and died while under the MRI. I assume it was an MRI. This was actually several years ago, but the report didn't come out till recently, as far as I understand. Anyway, it's very interesting article, but what it showed, or what was interesting about the scenario, is that they were able to track this man's brain waves before and after clinical death. I think his heart had stopped. So there's varying definition about what clinical death is. I mean, you can have brain death, you can have heart attack, your heart stops, etc. You would think we could agree on when death happens, but I think medically, there's a lot of controversy even within fields that are very hard science. But these scientists concluded that he was in fact dead. But the gamma waves in his brain, there's several different types of waves, but they track the gamma waves because those are in the hippocampus during dreams, I think is what the significance of it was. And they said that it had a very peculiar pattern of brain waves, as if the brain was uploading information somewhere, or having a life recall, the literal, your life flashed before your eyes. Well, this appeared to be consistent with that concept. And so they looked at, I think they went and they looked for other cases, but they couldn't find any, which makes sense because you're not typically, you don't have patients die in the middle of this procedure. I mean, I'm sure it's extremely rare. It just happened to be the case in this one. But I want to have Donna comment on that. I mean, we're always kind of looking for scientific evidence to prove some of these things that are very hard to prove. I'm wondering if she thinks that might be significant in this idea that when you do die, you upload your experiences to the Akashic records. You send the information somewhere so it can be stored and maybe accessed later.
In answer to your inquiry, I would say this: what was happening and what the scientists were observing, because the body takes a long time to die. And you have all kinds of things that are going on as the organs shut down. You can have the heart go and all the other organs are still functioning. You have circulation that's still going on. You have all kinds of cellular activity, even though an organ can die or someone vacates the body, there is still all of this shutting down of the system. And many times you're not able to reboot, which in this situation, they weren't able to reboot. But the brain actually, and this is just information I'm getting, the brain actually is going through a process of trying to survive. And as an organ of the body and with all of the responsibilities the brain has, it often will shift from one positioning to another to try to keep everything going. And I think that in part is what was happening, is that the cellular structure of the brain was automatically saying, this part of the programming is dead, the body is dying, so I'm going to shift it over here, and I'm going to make this section work. I'm going to put it over here. And it is, people can vacate the body. They're just gone in a split second. I've seen it happen, and I've known many different situations where people, they're dead and they will not be recognized that they're dead by anyone because there hasn't been anything dramatic like them falling to the floor or something like this. They'll go, come on, wake up. Come on, wake up. The brain is still working. The organs are still working. So there's a systematic shutdown that occurs. And the brain is one of those organs where that shutdown, it will keep seeing and seeking out, just like our computer systems that we're using right now. If some little segment isn't working, you've got stuff going on in the background that says, okay, well, let's connect over here. Let's connect over here. And it's really tough. But when that person left, they were gone. They didn't come back into the body. The body is a phenomenal essence of intelligence. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. And it has its intelligence. And this is something that healers recognize. So when this occurred, they honest to God don't know what they've got. They don't know what they've recorded. They've recorded something, but they have no way to go in and tap the guy on the shoulder and say, excuse me, can you go back and give me a replay? I'd really like to know this again. Let's do it again. The truth is that there have been scientists that have proven certain things, that have demonstrated certain things over and over and over again. But every generation comes in, they have not had the wisdom of sharing of experience. And so consequently, they are having to do this all over again. And you go, wait a minute, don't you know about this and this and this and this that somebody researched, and this was what's, well, that was then. We've got to try it because in our world today, I don't believe that that's going to happen. We have to be willing to look at what went on in the past. And then, and today we've got a lot more toys to work with. But there's a lot of wisdom in ancient Indian records, East Indian records, in Native American cultures around the world. And little by little, we are opening up and being willing. And it takes the individuals collectively coming together. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more of. And that's because of our technology that we have. It's isolated us in some respects, but on the other hand, look at what has happened around the globe because of it, with the current dramatic situation that's going on. And there's so many other things. I mean, it's just, to me, we are not unlike the Industrial Revolution. We have a technological revolution. We have a spiritual revolution. We have so many things that are going on. And a lot of the old systems, they're screaming, they're having tantrums, they're explosive. They're saying this isn't right. That doesn't fit the modality that we show that it is absolutely only this way. And what's happening is that we're saying, excuse me, but I think I'll take door number 4. You've got 4 here. After I get to door number 4, I think I'll go to number 1 again and get a refresher. And then I'm going to go to number 3. And then I'm going to go to number 2. We're not wanting to limit ourselves. At least we shouldn't. And that's where I think having this kind of programming and having communication and sharing different people's opinions and perspectives, it's so important. It allows us to grow up.
Yeah, and I looking or referring back to that article, I had a vision of the HAL 9000 in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where HAL is dying piece by piece as the character takes the memory out. And I'm thinking what Donna alluded to here is that the brain, I think we know almost nothing about the brain. I mean, setting aside the idea that there's a universal consciousness that the brain taps into, I mean, that's beyond our comprehension. But even the brain itself, it's such an adaptive organ. And I think your interpretation is probably correct. The brain knows how, it has backup systems, just like a computer. It has plan B and plan C and plan, down the alphabet. And to shift the abilities of one area that we think a certain type of perception or other function is confined to a whole other area is just incredible to think of. And then when you go into the idea that other organs may be capable of doing that, shifting responsibilities, the heart is not only responsible for pumping blood and so on. It holds emotions and, can cover for other organs. That type of stuff makes you realize how much more we have to learn about everything, even ourselves, these bodies that we live in day to day. We don't know what our vessel is capable of. And so, as you say, we keep opening doors. Hopefully we'll learn that eventually and realize how limitless we can be in body and soul and mind. I mean, I think it's an exciting journey that we're just starting here. So I totally agree. That's our purpose here, is to get that conversation going and just learn.
Well, Donna, thank you for spending time with us. I feel like we've discovered a treasure in you, and I hope you will consider coming back, visiting with us. And if you had a terrible time, just forget our names.
No, but I'd like to give Donna a chance to show us a couple. She's got a couple books here that
do that again.
Yes.
Incredibly fascinating that we need to have people know about.
Yeah, let me see if I can put it up. It's called Dying to Wake Up by a Dr. Rajiv Bharti, MD, and that's Rajiv.
Yeah, we can see that. That's good. Dying to Wake Up.
Now, this is a gentleman that I met, Jerry Willis, 10 years ago. His book is fascinating, and it's called Healer, the Jerry Willis Story. And he's had a near-death experience, but his journey has been a very unique one. And he's a healer, and he's just a very, very nice human being. And not very many people know about Jerry Willis. And I happened to pull his book out of the library, and I thought I'd like to share that.
Now, do you do personal consultations or readings also? Is it donnaseebo.com? Is that the best place to go?
No, go to, just Google my name. Just Google my name, Donna Seebo. And you've got my email up there, I believe. So you just Google my name and you'll find all of the information about my award-winning children's books, my other publication like Mind Magic, and my audiobooks, and then information about my show. And as I mentioned in the beginning, my show I've got 6 a week, and I interview people from all over the world. I've got interviews coming up with people from England and Denmark and other places as well, Canada. And there's very eclectic subject matter on my show. So I may have a medical professional on one day, the next day I might have someone in an area of mind development, like the Gaia, alchemy. There's just archaeologists, just so many people. I like different subjects. I like to be able to incorporate different things. I'll talk about science, I'll talk about medicine, I talk about so many different things. And to me, it makes doing the programming interesting. And my show I've had for 21 years, and I've got a secondary show I started 8 years ago called Warriors for Peace. And those are hour-long conversational interviews. And I really like that. Years ago, you had talk shows where, like we're doing today, this is something where you did have conversation between people and asking questions. And I think that's what education is about, conversation where you can share information. You're not using a hammer saying it's just one way or the other way, bang, bang, bang on somebody's head. No, this isn't dogma. This is information that you can use if you want to use it. And if you don't want to use it, that's okay too. But at least be aware you have this option. And I've got hundreds of shows that are available for people. They can go in and listen anytime. And they're in my archives. There's a player on my network page where they can go in and just turn the computer on in the background and do whatever work they want to do and listen to all of my wonderful guests. It's really great. And then when I'm in studio where I can take callers, I always announce that at the bottom of the hour, where I'll say I'm in studio or I'm not in studio, so they can pay attention to that. And if I'm not in studio, I will say, so they can't call in. But if I am in studio, they can call in and talk with me directly. And that information is given out over the air.
Well, thank you again. Dave, do you have any final thoughts there for Donna?
Well, we aspire to have a show like Donna has. Is my thought right now is that
I think we could learn some things from
she's been
Donna, quite a
doing
few things.
she's been doing it for a long time, and we totally agree that that approach of just bringing in all sorts of disciplines, different points of view, is really a good. It fosters an environment of learning. As you say, you can pick and choose what you're particularly interested in, but you start making connections between things that you didn't, on the surface don't seem to be related necessarily right away. But after a while, when you talk about enough of this stuff, you realize that everything is connected. And it just gives you a better understanding of how things work, how people work together or don't work together, how different disciplines can mesh at certain levels. It just makes for a more educated audience. And, you learn and learn, and you can never stop learning. But we really do appreciate that you're doing the same thing as we are, and we aspire to become better at it too, with excellent guests such as yourself. So I just want to say thank you, Donna, for taking the time, for hanging out with us. It was really fun and educational.
Well, thank you. I love doing it. I mean, I think I'm just one Gabby Gert, and I just love to do it. I really do. I find that the more that I can share and the more that I can bring to the table for anyone, including myself, it's going to make life a lot better because it takes all of us. Nobody's exclusive on this. Nobody. And when we can be able to share openly. And I'm so grateful for the technology that allows us to do that. I appreciate so much your sharing this with me and inviting me to be a guest. And by golly, if the two of you are over at the IANS meeting on April the 11th, you are more than welcome. And hey, maybe we could have a cup of coffee or tea afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm planning on being there.
Good.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I'll see you then.
All right. Bye-bye, Donna.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks again.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye.